afternoon. I am very thrilled to have this opportunity to address such an audience. I'm going to be speaking to you about a topic that I'm very passionate about and something that's very dear to my heart. And I hope that by the end of this, you too will see why this is so. I'm going to begin by throwing some controversial ideas and issues around. North versus South, East versus West, Clinton versus Bush, Harper versus Obama. Sorry, I meant to say Harper versus Obama versus Keystone, that's what it is. China, Iran, and Russia versus NATO, the 99% versus the 1%, rich versus poor, and versus. Benghazi, religious extremists, drone attacks, revenge suicide bombers, more drone attacks, more suicide bombers. And the Middle East is in flames, or democracy, take your pick. So what is all of this for? The conflicts I just mentioned, what are all of these issues and ideas about? Drum roll, please. Oil and extremism. Is it really all about oil and extremism? Is it just about oil and extremism? If I was to stand in front of you, which I am, and scream Eureka and say that I have found one single answer, just one, to a major part of our pollution, reducing the consumption of fossil fuels and raw materials, reducing our yearly body count for patients with diabetes and heart disease and so on, reducing deforestation, keeping our water resources clean and sustainable, and above all, reducing the strain on our financial resources. One answer to all of these things. Would you call me crazy? Probably. Or a tree hugger? Maybe. So you're probably wondering where I'm going with all of this or what these aspects have in common. I'd like to address the issue of sustainable development as a start. We are all living, breathing, drinking sustainable development, so we are all vastly aware of what we as people need to either maintain or improve in order to ensure a stable environment not only for ourselves today, but for future generations. It is estimated that 1/3 of fossil fuels and raw materials in the USA are used to produce a specific kind of food. What kind of food would that be? Well, this specific kind of food also consumes 87% of American agricultural land per year. Farm animals consume 80% of American grain grown yearly, 80% of American corn, and 95% of American oats. Fun little equation. To produce 1 pound of beef, you need 13 pounds of grain. The ratio is 1 to 13. We produce far more grain, corn, and oats to feed the animals than to feed ourselves. Another fun little equation. To produce 1 pound of potatoes, you need 60 gallons of water. And that's bad enough as it is. However, to produce 1 pound of beef, you need 12,000 gallons of water. Not 1,200, 12,000 gallons of water, just for 1 pound of beef. I hope you all noticed this number not only increased and doubled, but it is 200 times greater. Is everyone with me on this? Domestically, you consume 106 gallons of water per day. That includes your drinking, showering, daily coffee, whatever it is that you may be doing. If you add just 1/4 pound of beef, you have increased your daily consumption by 3,000 gallons to a grand total of 3,106 gallons of water. Half of all water in the USA is used for meat, specifically meat production. So I'm hoping and assuming that all of you by now have gathered that the specific kind of food I'm talking about is animal-based food. And just to address the resulting question, which I'm always posed when I talk about this matter, is proteins, right? We need proteins. We can't survive without them, and how are we going to get them other than animal-based food? I completely agree. However, it is estimated that a meal consisting of 2 potatoes, not French fries, has a sufficient protein count for an adult per day. So since we're on the topic of sustainable development, what is another issue we are faced with? Deforestation. 90% of deforestation in the USA is due to beef consumption. How is that possible? 260 million acres of land were destroyed and are used for grazing cattle. 1 acre of land disappears every 8 seconds worldwide. So you all remember Brian Tobin on our East Coast when he closed down those fisheries and how much he was vilified and opposed for doing so. It was a very brave and important step for Canada, and it was supposed to lead by example. Unfortunately, the rest of the world failed to follow. On a global scale, we fish far greater amounts than fish can reproduce themselves. By doing this, we are destroying the inhabitants of the ocean and thus the oceans themselves. And by doing this, we are destroying the foundation of life on this planet. Did you know that half of the world's harvested fish is fed to livestock? So not directly for our consumption. We feed the animals so that we can eat the animals. So I've addressed food in concern to sustainable development. However, since it is food and we intake it, it must have some toll on our health, either to improve it or deteriorate it. Let's start and talk about obesity. What can we relate with obesity? Fat, fatty foods. Children in the USA are known to be on cholesterol-lowering drugs. Children, not 50-year-old adult women, but children. 1/3 of children in the USA are considered overweight or obese. They consume 225 pounds of meat per capita per year. America is considered one of the fattest nations, and unfortunately, Canada is not far behind. What about arteries? 85% of adults suffer from the hardening of the arteries. And how does this happen? Cholesterol. Where do we get cholesterol? Meat. Heart disease. Half of the American population will die of heart disease. And cancer, 40% will develop cancer. Our consumption of meat has increased through the roof, and our consumption of vegetables has been condensed to the occasional iceberg lettuce, ketchup, and French fries. Now, if this is not the case for you here in the audience, I truly congratulate you. I really do, but I'm not done. By the age of 65, we stuff 50 tons of food down our throats. That is the equivalent of 6 of those garbage trucks that you see up there. 50 tons of food. At these amounts, we cannot afford to be intaking the wrong kind of food. It is inferred from a variety of studies that a long list of diseases, not just heart disease and cancer and obesity and whatever else I mentioned before, but a long list of diseases are caused primarily from consuming animal-based food. And as a result, the cost of our healthcare has risen to almost unsustainable amounts. This is an issue being debated now, and we know this. All right, so in my Eureka statement, I promised to reduce body count. And I've mentioned this a little bit with health and what I just said right now. However, what about wars? Well, what do wars have to do with food? What do wars have to do with this specific food I mentioned? Nothing that we can relate right off the bat. As countries around the world are developing, they have greater incomes and they're becoming more wealthy. And as a result, they tend to follow our dietary habits. Unfortunately, it would be better if we followed them in this particular case. For example, certain populations, such as the Japanese, who were primarily on a vegetable-based diet, had significantly lower rates of cancer and heart disease than the population of USA. As soon as they became more wealthy, consumed more food, and followed our dietary habits, their rates of cancer and heart disease became similar to ours. All right, so in a second. In front of you, you have a diagram which would explain how food relates to wars, but I'm going to give you a quick example. In the last 20 years, the Chinese population has increased in wealth, and we all know this. And I just mentioned that when wealth increases, we consume more meat. By consuming more meat, what do we know about meat production? You need more oats and grain, tons of oats, grain, and whatnot. And in order to produce oats and grain, you need what? Oil. What do we know about oil that makes it so special? It's limited and non-renewable, correct? This means that as the demand for oil is rising, the strain for oil is rising, thus conflicts and wars spark for this oil. So I'm going to draw back to the original question which I posed. Are all of the things and conflicts like Benghazi and so on related to oil and extremism? In a sense, yes, they are. However, the really important question here is there some way that we as people can reduce our consumption of oil and thus deflate the extremists? Absolutely. We can do this simply by driving more fuel-efficient cars, water-saving toilets, solar energy, and whatnot. However, we can drastically reduce the amount of oil consumption simply by returning to a vegetable-based diet. I know that is difficult, especially for those of you in the audience who were raised on an animal-based diet, and it's a concept that we are not necessarily open to accept. I am fourth-generation vegetarian on my father's side, and my mother survived breast cancer, and then 10 years later gave birth to me. I consider myself a relatively healthy child. I don't have limitations. And she survived breast cancer simply by returning to a plant-based diet, specifically a vegan plant-based diet, and even more specifically, a raw vegan plant-based diet. I remember growing up in a vegan household, going to school and being mocked and ridiculed by my fellow classmates because they had the chocolate and Kit Kats in their lunch boxes, and that came with apples, carrots, and avocado. And I would come home and ask my parents if I would always be the weird child or if they'd ever be like me. Fortunately, as I grew up, I noticed in the news how certain initiatives were taken, and chocolates and sodas were removed from school. And in recent years, Michelle Obama is starting all these health campaigns. And even in more recent years, actually last night, the LA Times published a magazine where it stated that they are promoting the residents of Los Angeles to go meatless for a day. They call it Meatless Mondays. And they mentioned 2 reasons for doing this: health and sustainable development. Now, I am in no way saying that by becoming vegetarian, all your problems will disappear. You still have to go home and pay your mortgage. I have a math test on Friday, and I have to worry about passing SATs to get into law school. However, by becoming vegetarian, it is estimated that you can save 1 million gallons of water per capita per year. If that's not enough, you can be healthier and reduce your risk of getting sick. If that's not enough, you can say you helped guide the world to a better place. It is ironic that we are testing on animals to find cures for diseases that were inflicted upon us by eating animal-based foods in the first place. Here's a list of people whose names you might hopefully recognize, and it is just a small fragment of the hundreds and thousands of names that you will recognize and the millions of names of people who you won't recognize who have publicly stated that they are vegetarian or actively vegan. People like Sir Isaac Newton, Pythagoras, Clint Eastwood, I cannot pronounce that name, Herodotus, and Bill Clinton. He's my famous friend. He's not really my friend. We're not close and tight. However, he's part of my little vegetarian club, so it has to count for something, right? Would you like to join me? And I know it's a difficult thing to ask, but would you like to join me, maybe just one step at a time, this little vegetarian club? Because we can take on the world, and we can guide this planet to a better place. We don't need a new planet. This is our home. We just have to know how to take care of it. And a last little thought before I go, drawing back to the title of my presentation, why a dove and not an eagle? Why is the symbol of peace a dove and not a vulture, for example? Simple. Because it is one of the few vegetarian and non-aggressive birds. Thank you.